Hi, welcome to Taktik Airsoft, and today we'll be talking about gas blowbacks. In particular, we'll be looking at the M4 platform. We have two versions here, one from KWA, the LM4 RIS, and one from WEtech, the WEtech M4A1 RIS. This is a client's gun. It's basically been modified slightly, while this is the store's evaluation gun. So, they're both open bolt guns. And what does that mean? Well, basically every time the bolt carrier cycles, you visibly see it from the outside. So what we're going to be doing is basically going to show you these two offerings if you're looking for a brand new gun, and look into externals, internals, potential upgrades, as well as basically shooting performance. So let's start off with the externals. Both are aluminum construction. So basically what you have is a lower and upper receiver. Both have one-piece lower and upper receivers with aluminum barrels and aluminum rails. This model usually comes with a carry handle as well as a LE stock. This is actually a modified STR stock and an ergo grip. There's not much difference with the KWA. Again, you have aluminum construction nearly everywhere, apart from some pins and some parts and components like the ejection port. But everything else tends to be aluminum, and it comes with a crane stock instead of the Leo stock, as well as a simple A2 style fixed sight. Both guns come with basically a 10.5 to 10 inch outer barrel and a barrel extension. The barrel extension on the WEtech is actually pretty visible. You can see it, the stop here with a bit of wear. It's basically this part here. The KWA, on the other hand, actually starts within the front sight post assembly. That, for some people, might be an issue. If you want just to put your flash hider here, you have a bit of it's going to be flush with that, while it's not going to be flush here. It depends on what you intend to do on the externals. Both can take real steel grips. Both have milsim stock tubes, and both have metric barrel nuts. Well, can use metric barrel nuts. So in terms of the ability to pick up rails and stuff like that, basically any Mad Bull or PTS rail would function pretty well. In terms of finish, the WEtech tends to lose its finish over time. You can see quite a lot of wear here, as well as on the inner edges of the magwell as well. The magazine has lost quite a bit of its paint over time. We haven't been able to evaluate the KWA very long, so it doesn't show any signs of wear for the moment. We have other KWA products where we've a bit beaten them up, and yeah, in certain cases where there will be like scratches, but that tends to be whenever we really violently gouge the gun. So both guns are standard M4s, so standard controls. You have your safety selector on the left side, as usual, safe, semi, and auto, bolt catch functional, magwell release or magazine release, and a functional forward assist. That will basically drive the bolt forward if it's held back. They both come with ambidextrous mounts. This is not the original mount for the WEtech. The WEtech one is a loop that goes from one side to the other, while the KWA has individual mounts on either side. Okay, so let's look at the internals. So now we move on to the internals. Basically, I've taken off the upper receivers, pulled out the bolt carriers for both. This is the WEtech components, and these are the KWA components. They're both very similar. In honesty, they use a similar design. Basically, you'll have to excuse us here. There's quite a lot of lubricant inside. Basically, when you pull the trigger, a hammer will knock this component, which is the valve knocker, that will strike the valve within the magazine. That little button basically pushes gas out. Gas goes into your bolt carrier nozzle, and then out the front it's pushing out the BB and pushing the bolt carrier to the back. You have a buffer that will basically return the bolt carrier forward, and within that process it actually resets the hammer and resetting the trigger at the same time. So typically entirely mechanical system, which is fairly faithful to the real thing. Now the biggest difference between the two in terms of component wise is that the WEtech has what's called a trigger box. So this section here is actually a box within the lower receiver where all the trigger components, so trigger, hammer, sears and springs, as well as the valve knocker, are one unit that can be removed entirely and replaced by an upgrade or a different version. On the KWA, on the other hand, the actual trigger unit and hammer and all those pieces and components are actually separate. They're actually part of the lower receiver, which makes it a little bit more realistic. In fact, the hammer on the KWA is considerably larger and is shaped almost like a real hammer. So for some people that want a little bit more realistic looking systems, well, the KWA is a bit more interesting. Now, when it comes to price, in Canada, well, in the USA, the prices are quite different. But in Canada, you would find a WEtech for about $480 or actually $460 to $500 for this configuration, and the KWA could be found from $550 to $580. Why the major price difference? I know that KWA is a well-known brand that basically has a good reputation when it comes to reliability and stuff like that. But where does that stem from? Well, let's look at the actual internal components closely. What you have here is actually a steel bolt carrier. So I have a magnet that's stuck to it. While the materials used in the bolt carrier for the WEtech, well, is colloquially known as pot metal. It's actually a zinc / aluminum combination, which is relatively soft and over time does wear out quite fast. Typically that's why you'll find a lot of internal components from companies like WEtech that replace all these parts by steel components. While we talked about the bolt carrier being steel, well, so are the internal components within the trigger system, beyond just the trigger. The trigger is not steel, but the hammer, the roller on the hammer and all those parts are steel. On the WEtech, only the roller is actually steel. The rest of the components, again, are of a different material. Only the valve knocker housing is steel. The same goes for basically the bolt catch, which on the WEtechs are notorious to wear out over time. The bolt catch on the KWA is actually steel as well, so hopefully that'll last a bit longer. The other component that I noticed that is far beefier on the KWA than on the WEtech is essentially the pickup, the BB pickup ramp. Well, I don't know what to call it, but I usually call it the finger. It's basically this piece here on the nozzle. That piece basically picks up your next round from the magazine and puts it in the chamber. It's practically twice the size on the KWA, and it's actually made out of metal. The one on the WEtech is actually made out of plastic. This is a common failing part, actually. This is KWA. So next we're going to talk about hop-up adjustment. Basically the differences between the two. It's going to be pretty short. Then we'll talk about magazines, and then we'll do some shooting tests. For anybody who already owns a KWA product, especially a gas blowback product, you'll be pretty familiar with the system here. It's essentially a form of castle nut that is around the chamber, or in the chamber actually. They give you a special tool to adjust it. Not too hard, but it's not too easy either. It's not like a WEtech SCAR hop-up adjustment, which is really simple. The WEtech, by comparison, is something of a nightmare sometimes. It's very annoying. It's going to be very hard to see here, but at the very top of the chamber is a tiny, can't even see it without the charging handle, is this tiny little grub screw that uses a 1mm Allen key to be adjusted. Well, that's your hop-up. That's your hop-up adjustment. It's sometimes really annoying. I usually just set mine and leave it there. Okay, let's look at magazines. So, these are the magazines for the two rifles. On your left is the KWA, and on your right is the WEtech. The WEtech is a 30 round magazine. The KWA is a 38-40 round magazine. They both have aluminum construction and are pretty solid. I have to say though that the WEtech is considerably lighter than the KWA. They both have equivalent magazines in the polymer style, so if you're looking for a Magpul design, well, both the WEtech and KWA have offerings. WEtech has what's called the Msk Magazine, so it's their Masada magazine. And KWA has what's called the PTS EPM, or Enhanced Polymer Magazine from PTS. The OEM is KWA. In terms of the differences between the metal and polymer mags, the polymer doesn't basically exude or doesn't basically dissipate the cold as fast as the metal mags would. So they're going to be less gas efficient than these mags would. A typical KWA magazine in Canada would be found for about 65 to 75 bucks, while a typical WE magazine should be around 50 to 55. Now, what warrants the price difference? Well, we'll see that later whenever we actually do the shooting tests. But in actuality, you should take into consideration that this is a 30 round magazine. So, assuming you have 4 mags, which is the equivalent of about $210 or $220, or between $200 and $220, depending on where you got them from. And the KWA, if we average it out $70, if you bought 3 mags, you have the equivalent amount of BBs. So 120 rounds and 120 rounds, and they actually come up to the same price. So if you take it on a BB count, or on a per BB count, they're actually literally the same. But now, in terms of performance, well, we're going to see that soon. So, on to shooting tests. So we filled both magazines to capacity. 40 rounds for the KWA, 30 rounds for the WEtech. Basically, we also made sure that there's some springiness inside with the BBs, because if it's too hard, you run the risk of, in the WEtech, breaking that finger under the nozzle. So let's load up our mag. Nice sharp tap. The bolt. Put in semi. We're going to do a whole semi run and then evaluate basically the performance, refill it, and then do another semi run and see how long, basically, how many rounds we could put out through the gun on one gas charge. So, mag locks on empty. Bolt catch, and we're done. Now let's move on to the KWA. Where's the KWA? KWA is over here. So we're going to go do the same thing, except this time we actually have a 40 round mag. So, this rack, it's in semi. Honestly, the KWA actually kicks harder and is it's actually pretty loud. Locks on empty, mag out, bolt forward. By default, the KWA actually shoots around 385 out of the box, so it's actually a good gun for outdoors. Indoors you may need to install the in-pass valve for it, but it's pretty cool. The WEtech, on the other hand, actually runs around 415 out of the box, so you definitely need an impasse right off the bat before even playing anything. So what we're going to do is basically, like I said, we're just going to refill the mags. We're not going to refill with gas, we're just going to see how long the mags can last with one charge. Okay, so see you soon. So we've refilled both mags, and now we're going to basically try to run the guns again. Same amount of, well, not the same amount, but the previous amount of gas that's still inside the magazine, and see how long they can last. Ambient temperature is about, I'd say, around 25 degrees. It's not exactly cold, it's not exactly warm, but it's pretty humid. So that's why you're seeing a lot of venting. So let's do this again. Not bad. So 60 rounds out of the WEtech on a full tank. Of course, you're going to see quite a large performance difference between you know, the first round and the 60th, but that's actually surprising. All right, let's move on to the KWA. Okay, definite slowdown towards the end. There's still a few BBs left. Mag is definitely much colder, but then again, that could be because it's dissipating cold faster. I need to know how many BBs are still left in there. I'll let you guys know a bit later. Okay. So basically I counted what was left in the KWA magazine. There was essentially 3 rounds left. So in total it did about 77 rounds. Honestly, the performance should be pretty close to the WEtech on semi-auto. Which is why, in fact, right now what we're going to do is basically the full auto test. I filled up all the mags. I let them rest for a bit so that they could warm up. And basically filled them up again. 30 rounds out of the WEtech as usual, and 40 rounds out of the KWA. So again, let's start with the WEtech. Again, a little tap. And this time, we're going full auto. Okay, well, I guess the WEtech's not a fan of full auto. It could be from the, previous test. It was still cold and whatnot. There was a lot of gas venting. I have to say, the upper receiver and lower receiver are quite wobbly on WEtech M4s. There is a good like a give. The KWAs are far more solid. Okay, let's try out the KWA. And again, tap, rack, full auto. Alright, definitely much better on a KWA. Like I mentioned, there's like practically no give in the system. Between upper and receiver, they're really tight. It's particular, I have a feeling it has to do also with the pin in the back for the lower receiver. It's very stiff. In fact, there's a satisfying click when you actually put it back. Maybe there might be a double detent in there, I'm not too sure. I'll have to look that up. But I hope that gives you guys a pretty good view on both guns. So the KWA LM4 and the WEtech M4A1. Hope you enjoyed the video. This was Gab, signing off.